All right, welcome in, everyone. Let's get right into it, because AI is completely reshaping cybersecurity. And honestly, we aren't just talking about, smarter spam filters or prettier dashboards anymore. We're talking about a massive paradigm shift in both defense and offense. In today's explainer, we're zeroing in on the Agentic SOC. That's a security operations center powered by autonomous AI agents. But more importantly, we're looking at how on earth we actually secure the identities of the AI agents we're deploying. We've got to move fast today because the threats we're facing out there, they are moving at absolutely unprecedented speeds. The AI perimeter is literally the new front line.
Just look at this number, 27 seconds. According to recent threat intelligence, 27 seconds is the fastest breakout time for modern threats right now. That is literally all the time it takes an adversary to compromise a machine and start moving laterally across your network. It's wild. Attacks are unfolding in seconds, not hours. Adversaries are actively weaponizing AI, and they're deploying intelligent agents to massively amplify their own speed and scale. Against machine-speed adversaries like that, relying on manual human defense, it just can't keep up. We absolutely have to fight AI with AI.
And the good news is, the industry is definitely responding. 33% of surveyed cybersecurity teams have already integrated AI tools right into their daily operations. We're seeing this massive, rapid mobilization of AI agents across the SOC. Defenders are adopting a whole new operating model, where AI agents are doing the heavy lifting, working side by side with human analysts.
But, and this is a really big but, here is the alarming flip side to that rapid mobilization. Only 30% of surveyed organizations report that they are actively addressing generative AI security risks. Think about that gap. It's massive. We are rushing to give AI the keys to the castle so it can defend us, but the vast majority of us haven't actually figured out how to secure the AI itself. And closing that exact gap is exactly what we are going to tackle in this explaining.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap. First, the rise of the Agentic SOC. Second, the non-human identity threat. Third, the Agentic Identity Lifecycle. Fourth, we'll hit the security mandates. And finally, orchestrating multi-agent defense.
Starting us off, Section 1, the rise of the Agentic SOC.
The real catalyst driving all of this is that the modern SOC is basically at a breaking point. Defenders are totally bogged down by manual processes, fragmented tools, and frankly, there's just a limit to human capacity. AI is fundamentally changing the rules of engagement here. Incremental automation, those simple scripts and static playbooks we've been leaning on for the past decade, they just aren't cutting it anymore. We've hit a critical inflection point. To get a decisive advantage, security teams have to evolve from reactive firefighting to proactive agentic operations. We need a SOC where AI agents can dynamically investigate, pivot, and respond to threats on their own.
Which brings us to Section 2, the non-human identity threat. And here is the major twist. Deploying all these autonomous agents introduces a massive new attack surface. Let's contrast the two models for a second. Traditional user authentication is pretty straightforward, right? A human logs in, they have a session, maybe they step away for a coffee, and eventually they log out. But AI agents use non-human identities, or NHIs. Think machine accounts, service identities, and agent-based API keys. They basically act like a highly privileged digital employee. But they are operating constantly interfacing with cloud services, databases, and external tools. The catch? These NHIs completely lack the session-based oversight of a human user. So your old firewalls and traditional access controls, they fail completely here because they were designed for human behavior, not persistent machine-to-machine AI communication.
So, we really need to understand the absolute worst-case scenario here. The OWASP Foundation calls this Scenario 6, or Agent Identity Compromise. You might also hear it called T9. Imagine an attacker stumbles across a long-lived API token, just sitting in some misconfigured cloud storage. And let's say this token represents a formal identity, like a Microsoft Entra Agent ID. The attacker takes that and uses it to impersonate your enterprise AI agent. Because this agent identity is already inherently trusted by your backend pipelines, the attacker suddenly has undetected, privileged, long-term API access. They can move laterally, escalate privileges, and here's the kicker. They aren't even trying to trick an LLM with some clever prompt. They've just straight up hijacked the identity itself right at the identity provider level. When that happens, your application layer security filters and those fancy conversational prompt firewalls, they are entirely useless.
All right, let's move to Section 3, the Agentic Identity Lifecycle.
So how do we actually combat this? We have to look at the architectural so what. In a zero-trust AI architecture, identity is the primary security perimeter. Full stop. Because these agents operate completely outside of specific user sessions and they chain tools together in non-deterministic ways, having a governed lifecycle isn't a nice-to-have, it's a strategic mandate. And this brilliantly illustrates our mandatory 5-stage blueprint for survival in a zero-trust setup. We call it the Agentic Identity Lifecycle. Think of this exactly like badging and clearance for a super-sensitive digital employee. Stage 1 is birth, Stage 2 permissioning, Stage 3 rotation, Stage 4 revocation, and Stage 5 decommissioning. At its core, this architecture absolutely mandates rotational identity management to prevent that persistent T9 identity compromise we just talked about.
Which flows perfectly into Section 4, enforcing the security mandates for each of these stages.
Okay, now that we have our blueprint, let's look at the specific mandates for the first 2 stages. At birth, we are formally creating a unique persistent agent identity. The security mandate here is that you must enforce unique identification and cryptographic anchoring. You have to mathematically prove the agent is exactly who it says it is to completely prevent identity spoofing and impersonation. Next up is permissioning, which is where the agent actually gets access to the tools, databases, and external services it needs. The security mandate here? Applying a strictly enforced principle of least privilege. You use granular role-based and attribute-based access control. And this is critical. Agents must never inherit excessive permissions from a user's session or rely on overly broad service tokens.
Now, what's really interesting about this is what happens if those first 2 mandates fail. You open yourself up to a severe identity spoofing and impersonation threat. If an agent is operating with overly broad API scopes, attackers can manipulate that agent into executing completely unintended functions. So for example, instead of just retrieving some authorized information like it's supposed to, a hijacked agent with broad permissions could be manipulated into exfiltrating your sensitive data right to an external server. That is exactly why strict scoping from the moment of birth is absolutely non-negotiable.
And that strict scoping builds directly into our next 2 phases, rotation and revocation. The mandate for rotation is all about limiting AI credential persistence. API keys and tokens, they have to be temporary. They need to expire after very short timeframes. This periodic refreshing prevents token abuse and completely neutralizes the threat of persistent long-term access if a service identity is somehow exposed. Then we have revocation. If an anomaly pops up, we need dynamic access controls to pull the plug immediately. The security mandate here is to neutralize agent hijacking, which is when adversarial data tries to trigger unintended tool interactions or unauthorized ops. We have to be able to automatically disable rogue agent processes in real time.
Finally, we reach the 5th stage, decommissioning, which is the final retirement of the identity. The security mandate here is preventing something called repudiation. We do this by ensuring the agent's final state and its entire reasoning path are recorded and cryptographically signed right before we purge its associated long-term memory. And it doesn't stop there. We also have to actively track rogue agent reappearance attempts. We have to ensure that blocked or disabled agents can't just try to sneak back into the network under a brand new spoofed identity. And that brings us to our final section, orchestrating multi-agent defense.
Because look, as your SOC matures, you aren't just going to have one isolated agent. You are going to have an entire ecosystem. And when you have multiple custom agents interacting, you desperately need a detective layer monitoring the whole network using AI-driven behavioral profiling. You have to track AI agent behavior over time, and you correlate their identity validation with historical access trends. The goal here is to flag anomalies instantly, especially in situations where an agent tries to initiate a privileged action outside its normal day-to-day scope, or if it suddenly inherits roles dynamically that it definitely shouldn't have.
To really secure this inter-agent communication, we have to enforce mutual authentication for literally all AI-to-AI interactions. One agent cannot just casually pass off a task to another without bidirectional verification. We have to prevent cross-agent privilege delegation completely, unless it is explicitly authorized through predefined, heavily monitored workflows. If an agent tries to delegate an abnormal task to a peer agent, the system has to detect that unauthorized privilege escalation immediately.
We have covered a lot of ground in this explainer today, from the terrifying speed of modern threats to the absolute necessity of the zero-trust lifecycle. But I want to leave you with one final, provocative thought to really anchor why this architecture, and particularly that decommissioning phase, is so critical. Ask yourself this: when your AI agent completes its task, whose identity is it leaving behind? Because if you can't answer that question with absolute cryptographic certainty, your AI perimeter is probably already compromised. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I really hope this gives you the blueprint you need to go out and secure your own AI integrations.